Here's what happened to Steve McQueen's Mare's leg. It didn't start as one famous gun. The records point to three, each with its own serial number, and only two came back into view after years buried in a $40 box of old prop parts. One later went to a museum. Another reached auction in 2025. The third still hasn't surfaced. So this story follows the rifle issued to McQueen himself, from a 1918 Winchester through television history and into a modern sale. To see how that happened, we need to go back to the first cut-down Winchester and the man McQueen picked to change it. The rifle that built Josh Randall. The gun began life as a Winchester Model 1892, built in 1918. A Winchester factory letter dates it to July 15th of that year, long before anyone could have guessed it would end up tied to a television star. 40 years later, Steve McQueen needed a gun that looked different from the usual Western rifle. In March 1958, he appeared in a trackdown episode called The Bounty Hunter, which worked as an early test run for the character who would become Josh Randall. McQueen didn't just grab any prop off a rack, he sought out Kenneth Howard, better known as Von Dutch, a custom builder, pinstriper, and gunsmith whose work already carried its own look on the West Coast car scene. A surviving photo puts McQueen and Von Dutch together in Howard's shop, holding the finished gun. McQueen's got the rifle level, working the lever action right there in the shop, and Von Dutch stands close, watching the mechanism the way a builder checks work he's proud of. That photo connects the actor, the builder, and the mare's leg before the weapon ever became a familiar part of McQueen's screen image. The two men had more in common than just this one job. McQueen raced motorcycles and collected them, and Von Dutch's pinstriping already covered hot rods and choppers across Southern California. So the gunsmithing work wasn't some random assignment handed to whoever was available on the lot. It came out of a working relationship built on custom metalwork McQueen already trusted, which is part of why the finished rifle looked less like a studio prop and more like something out of a car builder's garage. Von Dutch cut down the stock and shortened the barrel, turning a full-size lever-action rifle into something compact enough to carry one-handed. He also fitted an oversized lever loop, giving McQueen room to cycle the action fast while keeping the gun low at his side. It looked simple on camera, but nobody watching at home had seen a rifle shaped quite like that in a Western before. The shortened shape gave Josh Randall a clear outline the moment he walked into a scene. You didn't need dialogue to explain it. That gun told you this wasn't the same old cowboy with the same old sidearm. Wanted, Dead or Alive debuted on CBS on September 6, 1958. Early reviews didn't warm to it right away, but audiences did, and the show grew into one of the higher-rated programs of its time before CBS pulled the plug in 1961. For McQueen, the mare's leg became part of the job. It helped build the hard, spare image that carried him past television and into film. But the same change that gave the gun its look also created a problem no script could fix. A rifle with a barrel cut that short landed in a different legal category the moment the cameras stopped rolling. 3 serial numbers and a paper trail. That short barrel pulled the gun into the National Firearms Act, the federal law that governs short-barreled rifles. After production had already started, the producers reportedly paid $1,100 in taxes and fees to bring the cut-down guns into legal compliance. That figure alone tells you this wasn't just a clever prop job. Once Von Dutch cut that barrel below a certain length, the rifle stopped being an ordinary Winchester in the eyes of federal law, no matter how good it looked on screen. Here's where it gets interesting for anyone tracking one of these guns today. A mare's leg that came to auction years later carries a barrel that looks right from the outside, but is actually a solid piece of steel. It can't fire around. The lever action still cycles the way it always did. But that non-functioning barrel keeps the gun's current owner outside the NFA rules that would otherwise apply, since a barrel that can't fire isn't legally a barrel at all in the way the law defines it. So let's slow down for a second, because this is where the story stops being about the gun's look and starts being about the paper behind it. Now, paperwork is where this story gets specific instead of vague. An October 1958 invoice from Stembridge Gun Rentals, the company that supplied prop weapons to studios, lists 3 serial numbers: 852678, 468096, and 130985. A second invoice, dated October 10th of that same month, records serial number 852678 issued directly to Steve McQueen. That's the line separating a real claim from a guess. You'll run into plenty of people calling any cut-down Winchester from this era McQueen's Mare's leg. A resemblance and a good story aren't proof. Without an invoice tying a specific serial number to McQueen by name, you're just looking at a rifle that resembles one, and resemblance doesn't hold up the way a serial number does. The next 12 years leave a gap in the record until May 1970, when MGM sold off prop material through a dealer named David Weiss. Of the 3 serial numbers named in that 1958 paperwork, only 2 came back out of that sale: 852678 and 468096. Serial 130985 wasn't among them. A man named Doug Boyer found both surviving guns sitting at the bottom of a miscellaneous box of old prop parts. Picture that for a second. Digging through somebody else's junk box, pulling out 2 beat-up rifles and having no clue you're holding a piece of television history. He paid $40 for the whole lot, with no idea at the time what he was holding. Boyer kept 852678, the gun tied directly to McQueen by that October invoice, and later gave it to a man named Walter O'Connor after O'Connor helped him out with a job. Serial 468096 took a different road and eventually sold to the Autry Museum. If you want to see how this story ends, stick around, because the next part is where the real money shows up. One of those 2 recovered guns ended up behind museum glass, its story settled. The other, the one McQueen himself was issued, kept moving. It passed from collector to collector for decades, with its paper trail following every step behind it. From a $40 find to a 6-figure sale. Once Walter O'Connor held serial 852678, everything about the gun's future came down to one word: provenance. Think of it like a used truck with a stack of service slips going back to day 1. You know who drove it and when. And a truck with no papers might run just as well, but nobody pays extra for a story they can't check. After O'Connor, the rifle passed through 11 named private collectors. Each transfer kept the serial number tied to the same physical gun, which is the only reason this story can be told with any confidence today. The published chain includes names like Kalman, Klein, Kalman again, Gangle, Stovall, Martin, Del Castello, and Massaro. Kalman showing up twice might look like an error at first glance, but a gun can return to a past owner more than once, and solid records show that instead of smoothing it out of the picture. By the time serial 852678 reached auction, it carried a lot more than an interesting shape. Rock Island Auction Company listed it as Lot 44 out of Bedford, Texas, on August 15, 2025. The pre-sale estimate sat between $50,000 and $75,000. Reports point to a final price of $211,500, though that figure needs a direct check against Rock Island's own price-realized listing before anyone treats it as final. A standard 1892 Winchester in similar condition, with no story attached, might bring a few $1,000s at most, so that price gap is the paperwork talking, not the steel. Buyers weren't paying for a rifle that merely looked like a movie prop. They were paying for a direct issue record tying the gun to McQueen by name, production paperwork from the studio system, a factory letter dating the Winchester back to 1918, and a documented chain of 11 collectors standing behind the physical rifle itself. Serial 468096. The sister gun pulled from that same $40 box took a different path entirely. It's believed to remain today at the Autry Museum of the American West, sitting behind glass instead of moving through private hands. And then there's 130985. Named on the same 1958 invoice as the other 2, it never turned up in the 1970 prop sale, never showed up in Boyer's box, and hasn't surfaced anywhere in the collector market since. 3 serial numbers, 1 legend. But only 2 guns have a documented ending, and the third one leaves the whole story open. The gun's still missing. 2. Mare's legs came out of a $40 box of prop parts back in 1970. One sits in a museum today. The other reportedly sold for $211,500, decades and 11 owners later. Both still tied to the same television legend that started with a cut-down Winchester in 1958. Serial 130985 is still out there somewhere, unaccounted for, even though the paperwork proves it existed. 3 guns went out from that Stembridge invoice back in 1958, and only 2 of them ever came home. Somewhere, there's a cut-down 1892 Winchester sitting in an attic, a gun safe, or another box of parts nobody's opened yet, and whoever's holding it probably has no idea what they've got. That's the part of this story nobody's closed.